Nothing is working. I can't get out. Every time I try, it's the same. I never should have been fooled by that damn flyer. Treasure. Yeah, right. I will be lucky to get out of this alive. It started with that weird paper I found on my car in the parking lot earlier today. It was some sort of flyer advertising. Trick or treat for treasure. Real gold, precious gems, and more. All yours for the taking if you are brave enough. Join us tonight at 5 p.m., October 30th, 2024 at the Center Street Mall, if you dare. Costumes mandatory. It seemed like some sort of event or contest. I started to wonder if there was a legitimate prize or if this was some sort of scam. If it was some sort of Halloween contest and they were giving out actual treasure, I might be in for it. I was getting kind of crappy hours this time of year at work, so I would not turn down the prospect of a big prize. I had no plans for Halloween Eve anyway, so I thought, what the hell, why not? As I was reading the flyer and making my decision, my friend and co-worker Scott clapped me on the back and asked, "What are you reading?" I regarded him and showed him the flyer. "Some kind of contest. Check it out. There might be a legit prize or something. We should go." He raised an eyebrow but did not hesitate too long before responding, "Yeah, let's do it. Nicole might want to go too. She is always down to check out Halloween decorations and spooky shit, so she would love an excuse to go trick-or-treating. I will call her now." It was decided, and we went home to get ready. I got a blue jumpsuit and Michael Myers mask and took an empty pillowcase like I used to when I was a kid going trick-or-treating. I figured if they really did give out valuables to the winners, it might be a take all the loot you can carry, and I would need something to haul it in. I felt a bit silly, but if it was real, I wanted to be ready. I got in my car and drove off to pick up Scott and Nicole. Scott was dressed as a pirate, and Nicole was dressed as a witch. We regarded each other's costumes and enjoyed the nostalgic feeling of getting ready to go trick-or-treating. We arrived at the location at 4:50 p.m. and got out. I thought it was a bit strange since the Central Street Mall had been closed down due to a fire that destroyed much of the building. It had never reopened, but I guess somehow these people got a permit to host an event here. We found a few other people waiting there in costume, so at least we were not alone. I was looking around for some sort of event official to see if we should wait in a specific area. Scott and Nicole had struck up a conversation with two people wearing a ghost face and zombie getup. I waited and watched my phone, and at 5 p.m. on the dot, a large black van pulled into the parking lot. It had tinted windows and a small logo on the side that said, "Trick or Treat." It parked nearby, and a tall man in a large white sheet that made him look like a cheap ghost stepped out. He spoke very curtly, saying, "Is this everyone?" I looked around and saw a decent group of other people, and we all nodded in unison. He clapped his hands together and proclaimed, "Good, very good. Now a few ground rules about how this is going to work. The old stores in this mall have been converted into a haunted village. So, we have a large group of makeshift houses with real hardwood doors, decorations, and everything. Besides the eye candy of our authentic set, they have something I know you will all be interested in. You are allowed and encouraged to knock at every door and trick or treat as normal. The gifts these tenants give out will run the gambit from cash to valuable gems, gold, and silver. All of this treasure is real, I assure you. You are, of course, allowed to keep whatever you can take out." The group seemed excited and were about to cheer at the declaration, but the man in the ghost costume interrupted and held out his arm in a flourish and continued, "Now you might be thinking, what's the catch? Well, I am glad you asked. Once you are in there, you will not be allowed out until you can find the main door's release switch. But I must warn you, it is well hidden. On top of whatever you can get with your trick or treating, if you are able to make it out, you will win a prize of $100,000. We all gasped when we heard the crazy amount of prize money. If they were willing to shell out that much to the winners, I was thinking that this was going to be tougher than I expected. The man in the ghost costume resumed his explanation. Now, you will not be alone in there. Besides the villagers, there is something else that stalks the shadows. This other visitor is there for treats of its own, and if it catches you, well, let's just say you will be out of the contest. I heard a grim chuckle coming from underneath the cheap sheet and figured he was trying to play up the scary angle to this event. He continued with his instructions. Now the people in the village are there to help, but only if you follow their rules. Rule 1, you are to remain in costume at all times. Rule 2, you are to say trick or treat at every door. Rule 3, you are not to try and enter their houses no matter how desperate you are. Rule 4, you are to say thank you after visiting each house. Rule 5, you are not to try and sneak out through any other means. If for any reason you do not abide these rules, the villager who catches you is authorized to ring the disqualification bell, which will see you removed from play. Occasionally, the villagers will ring a town bell and lock their doors. This is the only warning alarm you will get when danger is near, and you should indeed be careful. Danger stalks the shadows. You will have to run or hide, though I would not advise the former. It is very fast. He did his best ominous laugh as he finished up and waved us toward the entrance. We looked at each other. Everyone was a little unsure. What exactly was the danger stalking the shadows? I was wondering myself if they were really giving out valuables or if this was some sort of trick. I also wondered what the alarm was for. I wondered if the danger was a person in costume trying to scare us like a haunted house. It seemed like if you broke the rules or got caught, you would lose your loot. As I was contemplating the rules, Nicole asked a question. What happens if we need to leave early? Like for a legitimate emergency? Is there some sort of emergency exit? We saw the man under the sheet shake his head and respond, "No. I am afraid you will have to exit like everyone else. If you are unable to continue, then I would suggest finding a good hiding spot and waiting for your fellow participants to open the door. Once you are in, the front door will be the only way back out. Also, cell phones must be checked at the door. You will be able to retrieve them when you leave. Don't try to sneak them in. That will be considered a violation of the rules. No unfair advantages. If anything is not agreeable and you do not wish to participate, let us know now. Otherwise, enter and conquer your fears. Good luck." He waved his hand, and it seemed he was departing before answering any other questions people had. There was some sort of staged fog or smoke screen, and he had suddenly vanished. The little magic act elicited a few cheers of awe for the stunt, but I wondered what we were supposed to do to get in. As if on cue, there was a loud rumbling sound, and the heavy-duty doors on the entrance swung slowly open. Next to the door, we saw a small lockbox with an aperture wide enough for our phones. One by one, we dropped them in. I did not feel great about doing so, and I was even more paranoid. This was a scam, and we were going to come back, and they would be gone. Scott and Nicole dropped their phones in and moved on, so I just did the same. We moved beyond the threshold with our small group. There were 15 people when we had arrived. Yet when I looked around before stepping through the door, it seemed we had lost 3. A dozen players in total moved into the darkness and braced ourselves for the challenge. The main door led through a narrow hall that was dimly lit. I could barely see in front of myself, and Scott and Nicole huddled close to try and not get separated. We were positioned around the middle of the row of players. The person in front was dressed as a Jedi and had a lightsaber that conveniently lit up at least some of the dark hall. We followed the narrow tunnel-like path, and as we all moved further inside, we heard the heavy entrance doors slam shut behind us. They were not joking. We really were locked in. I felt bad since someone near the back of the line heard the same sound and started panicking and saying he did not know there would be the dark tunnel in such confined space. He said he had claustrophobia and needed to get out. Another player stayed behind with him, and his pleas for help and knocking on the door faded as the rest of us moved further in. Fortunately, we soon saw a much stronger source of light. We had arrived in the so-called village. The area, which I think used to be the mall's food court, had been transformed into a Dark Ages-style town square. The light was emanating from a large bonfire in the center of the square. The smoke wafted up into an open skylight that allowed for some ventilation. There were huddles of small houses that looked handmade and very authentic to the theme they were going for. "This is so cool!" Nicole shouted out in glee as she admired the decorations. Besides the houses and other structures, there were a lot of other cool details. I had to hand it to them. The smaller flourishes were awesome. There was fake blood on doors and the ground. Large dents and slash marks were on many surfaces. Even if I lost, I thought this might still be fun just for the experience. Scott and Nicole shared in the enthusiasm of arriving, and we looked at each other and smiled and set about our treasure hunting. Scott pulled us along, saying, "Come on, let's hurry, the others have already started." He was right. The rest of the players had split up and were knocking at doors while we stood there. I agreed with him and pointed to the first house on the left and said, "All right, let's start on the left and work our way in a nice circuit around the square, and we can move further in then. Let's see if they really are giving away treasure." We moved up to the first house and knocked on the door. An older-looking woman wearing a domino-style face mask answered. She looked at us and waited, and I couldn't believe I almost forgot on the first house. We all said it together. "Trick or treat?" The woman smiled and reached into a small pouch she carried and produced 3 large red objects. She dropped them into our bag, and I looked down and saw something I could barely believe. The treat was a gemstone which looked like an actual cut ruby. I could not tell, but based on the size and guess of the carat, it looked like it would run several $1,000s. Scott looked on in disbelief and asked, "Do you think this is real?" And Nicole's eyes widened when she saw hers and indicated, "I think these are real. Holy shit, they were not joking. We gotta do more. Let's go." We were about to leave, but I remembered a rule right before we got burned by it. I turned around and said, "Thank you." Scott and Nicole followed my lead, and after we thanked her for the incredible treasure, she closed her door, and we moved on to the next house. We visited 2 more houses and were surprised and delighted by the offerings. The second house gave out gold bars, which also looked completely authentic, and the third house was handing out billfolds with $1,000 in cash inside them. 3 houses in, and we felt rich already. We eagerly moved on to the 4th house when we heard a bell ring and raised voices. It sounded like an argument, and someone was shouting in the distance. We approached and saw a man dressed in a devil costume banging on a door to one of the houses. The bell chimed again from inside, and the man in the devil costume screamed, "No! It's not fair! I just forgot! I was going to say it! You can't kick me out! Come on, I need this money! This is bullshit! You can't just make me leave! I am taking this money, you can't stop me!" He went on into an even worse tirade of colorful language, and it seemed like the issue was he had forgotten a rule and was out now. We watched on as he continued to rage. Suddenly another bell chimed in the distance, answering the first, and we heard a louder bell ringing from somewhere in the town square. This was followed by the sound of bars being placed on the interiors of doors and lights being turned out. Guys, we should hide. I think that is the alarm." Scott and Nicole nodded, and we found an area with a few crates next to the last house we had visited. The other players dispersed as well, except for the man in the devil costume, who kept pounding on the door of the villager who had caught him breaking the rules. The rest of the area became deathly quiet, and suddenly I felt a disturbing chill in the air and heard the faint rustling of something large moving nearby. I was wondering if the person in the stalker costume was supposed to bounce people if they broke the rules. We all watched on in our hiding places as the light dimmed near the house, and the man in the devil costume turned around and noticed the entire area was empty. "All right then, I will go, but I am taking the stuff I got so far. Just try and stop me." He was not going without a fight. I wondered how they would handle someone disrupting the game. I did not have to wait long. A looming shadow appeared behind the man as he was bellowing his challenge. He paused and was just turning to face it when it crashed down onto him, and there was a blood-curdling scream, and he had vanished. The man was gone, and all that was left was a red stain where he had been standing and a fallen bag. I was impressed at how realistic it was. I wondered if some of the other players were plants and they were trying to help them put on a show. Other players hiding nearby were gasping out loud, and some were trembling in their own hiding spots. It was quite the show. Even I was getting a little tense. As I was considering what was going on, Scott moved out of our hiding spot and crept toward the red stain where the man had been and whispered, "Mine now." He was quickly grabbing the contents of the man's bag, and a big smile spread on his face as he saw the gems and cash that he would be taking. I was concerned, since I did not hear anything to indicate it was safe to resume. Then I heard that same rustling sound and saw the shadowy form appear behind Scott. Before I could issue a warning, it was over. He was not pulled up and away, though. Scott was hit from behind and fell on his face. The attack looked too real and sounded like actual impact and painful tearing. My immersion was broken, and I was suddenly very concerned. I went to check on him. I was not going to let some actors actually harm my friends or anyone else. I heard a disturbing gurgling sound and a horrible crunching and chewing, and then running. The town bell rang again, and the lights came back on, and the trick or treating could resume. Nicole and I went up to Scott, who had not gotten back up yet. We guessed someone would escort him to the exit since he was out. When Nicole touched Scott, he did not respond, and when she rolled him over, she let loose a haunting shriek. I looked down at what she had seen. Scott had half of his head removed, sliced clean off. He was laying on the ground, dead. Warm blood soaked the area around his lifeless corpse, and I saw in nauseating detail the better part of his brain leaking onto the floor. I dropped my own bag in disbelief and horror. It was not just for show. They were actually going to kill us if we were caught. Nicole was still screaming and starting grasping at my arm, shouting that we needed to leave. I agreed, and we went back the way we had come from and sprinted to the main door. We heard screams from elsewhere in the village, and it signaled that others had realized the true danger and horror of what was really happening. We were not alone in our flight, and a couple in Raggedy Ann and Andy costumes were ahead of us and arrived at the door and started pounding on the massive gate, screaming to be let out. We moved up next to them and added our own chorus of pleas, but there was no response. My heart sank when I remembered that the only way to open the door was to find a well-hidden switch, no exceptions. I pulled Nicole aside, and she was near catatonic with fear. I tried to help her focus and spoke as softly but directly as I could. "Nicole, I know you are scared. I am too, but we need to get out. The switch, we have to find it. They are not going to let us out. We have to find the switch to open the door." She started to settle her breathing down and nodded her head and agreed. I know. Just, I can't believe they killed him. I can't believe they are doing this. What was that thing? How was it so fast? That can't be a normal person. It looked like a monster." She was starting to lose it again, and I told her, "I don't know. I have no idea. It does not matter. We need to find that switch to get out of here alive. Please, we need to go now." Nicole followed me, and I tried to convince the others by the door to help us search. They kept trying the door, and eventually the girl dressed as Raggedy Ann said, "Maybe it can't get us by the door. "It is not here. It is near the houses. We are staying here. As soon as it opens, we are getting the hell out of here." I could not begrudge their fear, but I was concerned that it might not be that easy. We really needed all the help we could get looking for the switch. Yet they were determined to stay, so we moved on without them. We got back to the town square just in time to find new bodies and scratch marks dotting the area. The man Nicole had spoken with before in the ghost face costume was lying in front of one of the houses with his entire front torn open and large portions of his innards missing. The sight made Nicole and I gag as we discreetly moved past the horrendous sight. The stench of fresh death and the nauseating miasma of torn open and splayed out bodies was almost too much to handle. We moved on and began searching every nook and cranny in the central village for something that looked like a switch. After about 10 minutes of searching, our hearts sank as we heard the town bell being ringing again. It sounded further off, like it was in a different section of the mall. We had not moved much further in, so we did not know how much of the mall had been converted into houses to play this sick game. Despite the distance, we did not feel safe, so we hid in the same spot as before and waited until the all clear was sounded. I had an idea that was born out of desperation, but I thought of a way we might be able to escape. I looked at the central bonfire still crackling and burning. Then I looked to the skylight, and I thought we might be able to escape if we could get up there. I had no idea if we could find the switch in time before we were killed, so any other escape would be welcome. I told Nicole the plan, and we started searching for anything like sections of rope or large ladders we could use, even the crates or something we could stack. The man in the Jedi costume came back into the square and saw what we were doing and offered to help as well. He had a harrowed look on his face, and his prop lightsaber had blood on it. We had stacked some crates and found a length of rope that might reach the top. We would have to find a way to launch the roped up another 10 feet or so. Fortunately, there was a small pipe or fixture visible on the roof near the panel, and it was feasible that if we threw the rope up like a lasso, we could catch onto it and climb up and escape through the skylight. I was concerned, since I had not done a rope climb since high school gym class, but having my life on the line was a good motivator. We made the loose, lasso-like section at the end of the rope, and after trying and failing to hook the pipe, we succeeded after the 20th try. The man in the Jedi costume, who was named Frank apparently, had volunteered to go first. He gave the rope a strong pull, and it held. He grabbed on and started hoisting himself up the rope. He was in pretty decent shape since he was making good progress. He was just a few feet from the skylight when we heard a bell ringing from below. We looked down and saw a person standing in front of their door, watching us ascend and ringing the bell. We shouted for Frank to hurry up, but we saw something above that made us all freeze in fear. It was a shadow that was moving on the ceiling, and it climbed into view, obscuring the dim light coming through the skylight. We heard a guttural snarling sound and a snap of gnashing teeth, and suddenly, Frank was falling. We all leapt off of the crates and tumbled down to get out of the way. Frank plummeted nearly the entire 28-foot drop from the ceiling. He struck his head on the stacked crates and smashed onto the floor with a horrifying crunch. I had rolled off to the side and broken the worst of my fall. I saw Nicole nearby on her side trying to get to her feet. Frank was motionless, and when I saw the amount of blood pooling near his prone form, I knew he was likely dead. I looked back up, and the haze of smoke obscured my vision. Something was still up there blocking the ventilation. I saw the glimmer of yellow eyes regarding me, and I heard a chilling and visceral growl that froze my blood. It was still here and still hunting us. I moved quickly and tried to get to Nicole and help her to her feet, but before I could act, there was an explosion of movement, and I saw a looming shadow on top of my own. I barely had time to throw myself to the side and avoid the crashing form of the creature as it left a giant dent in the ground where it had landed. In desperation, I managed to pull myself behind a wood panel that was sticking out from one of the houses. I looked back and saw the thing that had been hunting us. It was the first time I had seen it for longer than a brief second, and what I saw was a nightmare made manifest. It had jet black fur that seemed to shift and blend into the darkness itself. Prodigious claws nearly a foot long each emerged from the distorted hands of the thing. The face was still shrouded by some impenetrable darkness, except for the piercing yellow eyes that followed every movement of its intended prey with precision. The loud, bestial breathing of the thing was awful, and its breath smelled like death and decay. I had no idea what I was looking at, but the best analogy my fear-addled mind could conjure was a werewolf mixed with pure, hateful shadow. I managed to drop low, and the eyes did not track me by some dumb luck. I breathed a sigh of relief, and then a gasp of horror as I remembered Nicole was still out there. I lifted my head as much as I dared to look out into the square and saw the nightmare beast towering over her prone form. I heard her voice cry out and scream, "No!" before it was silenced by a single terrible strike that sprayed the whole area with her blood. It was too much, and I covered my head and huddled there behind the panel, hyperventilating and trying to come up with some plan to survive this. Scott and Nicole were both dead, along with who knows how many other participants. I had to try something. After the all-clear was sounded, I slowly emerged from my hiding spot and saw that Nicole's body was gone. All that remained was a pool of blood. I said a prayer for her and for Scott and left the morbid scene. I was on my own now, but I had to find that switch. I looked at my bag of treasure and sighed dejectedly. Not much use if I die before getting to spend it. The only treasure I needed was to leave this place alive. I moved past the first village and into another section which told a similar tale to the first. Blood and body parts, giant scratches, and sometime the remains of people's treasure bags. I had an idea and walked up to a door and knocked. A man emerged wearing a plague doctor costume, and I said, "Trick or treat." He handed me what looked like an uncut diamond, and I would have been thrilled before the reality of this place had been revealed to me. I thanked him and immediately followed up by begging him, "Please, man, if you know where the switch is, tell me. You cannot just sit here and watch us die. I don't know what kind of crazy operation this is, but if you are all involved, then you are complicit in all these murders. Please, you don't have to tell me. Just give me a clue, a direction, something. Just give me a chance." He started to close the door, and I considered kicking it in and forcing him to help, but his hand was already on a small silver bell, and I realized I would be signing my own death warrant by doing so. Reluctantly, I left the house and searched around for a different path. I saw something out of the corner of my eye that looked different. It was a small piece of metal sticking out of a wood wall panel. I thought I had found the switch, but instead, it seemed to be a door of some sort. It was a wall covering blocking one of the old entrances to the mall's technical corridors that go behind the stores and connect them. My heart leapt. I thought I had found another way out. I entered the corridor and sealed the way behind me. It was very dark, and I could barely see where I was going, but I pressed on. After walking a few minutes, I saw a light ahead and almost let out a cheer or joy when I saw an emergency exit door at the end of the corridor. My relief was short-lived, however, when I pressed the handle and the door held fast. I looked for a lock or something and saw nothing. I pressed harder and then started slamming my shoulder into the door and kicking it. My legs and shoulder were on fire, but I persisted, and eventually there was a cracking sound and some give. Several more attempts saw the door swing wide, and I was confused when instead of the outside, it appeared to be another corridor. I rushed on through, and after a few minutes of moving through the hall, I found another door. This one had a crudely written message painted on it. It said, "Aren't you forgetting something? I opened the door and was confused when I saw a wall leading nowhere on the other side. I looked closer, and it was not a solid wall, but another panel. I slid it open, and my heart sank. I emerged from a previously unseen section of the entrance corridor, and I stood before the massive gate blocking the entrance, and I felt utterly defeated. The exit had brought me back to the entrance. I looked back at the mocking message and realized there really was only one way out. I paced back and forth near the door. My mind was racing and I was struggling to cope with the fear and hopelessness I felt. As I paced about, I felt something as I stepped down and heard a sickening squelching noise. I stopped moving and was afraid to look down, but I forced myself to slowly lower my head, and I saw the eviscerated remains of the man and woman in the Raggedy Ann and Andy costumes. The silly ragdoll wigs remained, but the larger portions of their heads were missing. Apparently, the area by the door was not so safe after all. The bell rang again, and I was shocked out of my horror and into action. All I could bring myself to do was flee in a panic back the way I had come. I quickly sealed the panel and door behind me, just as I heard the slavering, growling sound of the beast stalking through the hall. I fled back the other direction and moved past the door I had taken to get into the technical corridor. I was hopeful this direction would lead somewhere, but I found a dead end. I slumped against the wall and stopped to rest. I knew at that point there was no easy way out. The fear and realization were starting to sink in. I was trapped. There was no choice. I would have to go back in and look for the switch again. I heard the bell through the wall and heard more running and crying, then screaming and death as even more players were picked off by that nightmare creature. I have been sitting here for I don't know how long. It feels like it has been a few hours, but I can't tell for sure. I don't know what to do or how long this will last. I don't think it can get me in here, but if I stay, I can't find the switch and get out. I don't think anyone else is going to get to the switch. I might be the last one left. I don't want to die. I have to try something. There is one area I have not checked upstairs. I thought I saw a strange light coming from a corner near an abandoned area close to the houses up there. I did not have time to check, but that could be it. That could be the switch. I have to find it. I can still get out. I just have to try. I am going to open the door now. The all-clear alarm has sounded and hopefully I have some time. It's now or never. I step out into the waiting darkness and break into a run.